Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 6 stories from Stories of Cryptids and much more. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 500 likes on this one. Of course, only drop a like if you feel this video is genuinely deserving of it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post videos just like this one all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm from the American Southwest, in what was once the Navajo Nation, and that's where this story takes place. I was dating this girl Gigi at the time. We'd been dating for a little over a year at this point, and had both just graduated high school. One weekend, Gigi's grandparents asked her to house sit while they were out of town. You see, they had a cat named Jake that her grandma absolutely adored, and they lived out in a secluded area 30 minutes from town, so it would be hard for someone to drive out there to check on him every day. It was an extremely rich neighborhood called Kayenta. Every home was a multi-million-dollar estate built on several acres of private property. So when Gigi asked if I wanted to stay over the weekend with her, I excitedly said yes. The first night her grandparents were gone, Gigi and I drove to the house, out in a gorgeous, fertile part of the Great Basin Desert. We followed the narrow road, weaving between dunes until we came to the end of the pavement. From there we drove another 10 minutes up a winding dirt road, and then we caught sight of the house. I was in awe. It was a beautiful adobe home with Mexican ceramic tile floors and Navajo tapestries decorating the walls. The first thing I did was wander through all the rooms, of which there were many. The front door opened into the living room, a spacious room with high ceilings, a fireplace, and plenty of seating. Just to the left was the dining room, kitchen, and bar area. Through the living room was her grandma's library, a couple bathrooms, and the guest bedroom. And finally, across the hallway was the master suite, decked out with a bedroom, a bathroom, a shower room, a sauna, and a den leading to a private porch. The place was built like a maze. Every room forked into 2 more, with multiple ways to get to anywhere. But my favorite thing about the house was how many windows there were. The walls of the kitchen and living room were entirely made of windows, so you could always take in the gorgeous desert view. We found Jake curled up on a couch in the den of the master suite. He was a large black cat with green eyes, and was very friendly. "Hi, Mr. Handsome." Gigi greeted him with a scratch under the chin, just where he liked it. "Did you miss me, Jakey?" He stretched out his neck and purred, enjoying the attention. I chuckled. Pets having human names was always humorous to me. "Aw, who's a sweet boy?" Gigi said in a cute sing-song voice. We must have disturbed him, because as soon as Gigi stopped scratching him, he got up, stretched his legs, and walked out the cat flap in the door. "They just let him come and go as he pleases?" I asked. "Yeah, he knows his way back home," she said. "We just can't let him out after dark." After putting out some food and water for Jake, Gigi and I decided to follow his lead, and we set out adventuring in the sandy red hills that surrounded the house. Being an experienced hiker, Gigi had a path she liked to walk in the early mornings when she stayed out here. She guided me through the washes and ravines, and we talked and admired the beauty. We were about 20 minutes away from the house. I didn't know whose property we were on, but we had surely crossed out of Gigi's grandparents by now. After a few more minutes of walking, once all the houses were out of sight, Gigi started climbing up a hill. "Up here," she said. "This will be perfect." The sun was just starting to set over the western mountains. If you've never been to the desert, let me tell you, the sunsets are the most beautiful I've ever seen. The sky turns into a painting palette, red, orange, pink, purple, and blue, fading to black as you look east, with millions of bright stars speckling the void. It was breathtaking. You see that valley over there? Gigi asked. Right at the slope of the mountain? I nodded. How many people do you think could fit in that valley? Like, if they stood shoulder to shoulder? I thought about it for a second. Probably like the whole country. What? She exclaimed. You know that's like 350 million people, right? Yeah, but people are, what, 2 feet wide on average? I reasoned. And probably less than a foot deep. If everyone got crammed in, I think we could do it. We could maybe do all of North America. Gigi wasn't having any of it. You had to retake algebra. There's no way I'm trusting your math. Algebra isn't real math. It's a puzzle with numbers, and I suck at puzzles. Gigi didn't respond, just kept staring off into the desert. After a moment she said, The whole country, huh? And this valley is only a fraction of the whole planet. There's so much out there I bet no one's ever seen. And been forgotten. Again she just stood there, staring at the beams of sunlight behind the mountains. It was starting to get dark. We should go back to the house, she stated. The coyotes are going to come out soon. We were on the way back to the house. The sun had completely set now, and darkness crept in fast. About halfway there, I felt the hairs rise on my arms. I got chills. It was a strange feeling. I hadn't heard anything unusual, but my brain was screaming at me, You are being watched. Before I could say anything, Gigi turned around and stared behind me. I think there's something following us, she said softly. She felt it too. Stay quiet, but act calm. I wanted to start booking it back to the house. Gigi had to tell me that's a bad idea. You don't run from predators, she said. Right now, it's just curious, but the second you start running, you become prey. So we walked. The minutes felt longer at night. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step, like it was getting closer, surrounding me. A chill wind blew through the air, soft as a whisper. Gigi? Dread opened its eyes. Did you hear that? My voice trembled. Every inch of my body went cold. It was 70 degrees, yet the wind cut to the bone. Strange for October. I didn't hear anything, Gigi insisted, but there was fear in her voice. We're almost there. Keep going. Slowly. Don't look back. Keep going slowly. Don't look back. I kept repeating it to myself. It became my mantra. We were walking up the last hill now. My heart was pounding. I don't know what was following us, but it wasn't just a coyote. Keep going slowly. Don't look back. The sand was loose beneath my feet. I prayed I wouldn't slip. If I fell backwards, the night would consume me. I knew it. Keep going, slowly, don't look back. Finally, we were peaking the last hill. Once at the top, under the light of the porch lamps, I turned around and looked. But there was nothing there. I had to laugh at myself. My mind had tricked me, let paranoia run rampant. It was only a coyote, I'm sure, if it was anything at all. Gigi and I walked into the refuge of the kitchen through the sliding glass door. In an instant, the warmth returned to my body, and a feeling of safety washed over me. We looked at each other, sharing a moment of peace. Then we started laughing. No more night hikes, we agreed, happy to shrug the whole thing off. While we stood there laughing at each other, I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she was. Her long, curly black hair, brown, almond-shaped eyes, and freckled brown skin. Seeing her laugh and smile made me feel safe. Maybe it was the adrenaline still pumping, but she never looked more beautiful to me. Want a drink? She asked. That was exactly what I needed. Perfect opportunity to check out the in-home bar, I thought, but Gigi declared those bottles off limits. That's the expensive stuff. They'll notice if it goes missing, she explained. My grandma used to keep some in the library, though. I'll see if it's still there. And she walked around the corner. I went to the den to check on Jake, but he wasn't on the couch. He wasn't in the living room or kitchen either. Probably not a big deal. Cats have places they like to hide, and this was a huge house. Plenty of spots to choose from. Still, it had been a while since we last saw him. I figured I should let Gigi know. But upon entering the grand library, I instantly forgot what I went there for. Enormous floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, built into the walls lining the entire room, filled left to right. No space was left unoccupied. There must have been 1,000 books in this room. I walked right past Gigi as she searched a cabinet to look at the selection. Many of the books were about Navajo people, about their traditions and beliefs, and about their superstitions. One in particular caught my eye, a book about Naldushi, or skinwalkers, shapeshifters in Navajo folklore. I picked it up and opened it. Half the text was in another language, and what was in English was analyzing the parts I couldn't read. I kept turning until I came to a picture of a frightening mythical creature, unlike any I'd ever seen, like a feathered wolf with antlers and human eyes. Quite an unsettling drawing. "Aha!" I heard Gigi exclaim. From deep in the cabinet, she pulled out a perfectly cheap bottle of Bacardi. "This won't be missed. Probably been forgotten about." She walked over and noticed what I was reading and visibly cringed. Put that away. I have nightmares about that book." "You've read this?" I was surprised. Gigi wasn't superstitious, or all that into Navajo culture like her grandma. Never mind that most of the book was incomprehensible. That and all the stories Grandma writes. She's really into skinwalkers. "I didn't know your grandma's a writer." "She's not so much a writer as, she claims that they're real stories." "Yeah, but that's part of writing ghost stories. You don't start it off by saying, 'This is totally made up.'" "No, I'm not kidding. She, actually believes this stuff." Gigi opened a small drawer in her grandma's desk. "Check it out." It was an old Colt Peacemaker. Gigi reached into the drawer going for the gun. I thought, but her hand moved right past it and grabbed the box next to it instead. She lifted the lid. Inside was full of bullets. She hand-loaded these. There's a pocket of ash inside, which is one of the only things that can hurt a skinwalker, according to her. "Can it kill one?" "The only way to kill a skinwalker is to call it by its human name." I know it sounds stupid, but Gigi saying the words human name is what reminded me of Jake. "Have you seen the cat since we've been back?" I asked. "Oh, good call." She set the bullets and alcohol down on the desk and headed to the master suite. "Jake," she called out while walking through the bedroom. No response. We entered the den where we last saw him. No sign of the cat. His food and water hadn't been touched either. Then I looked over at the cat flap in the door and remembered Jake leaving through it hours earlier. Gigi and I looked at each other and I could tell we were thinking the same thing. "This is so bad," she was saying, while opening the door to the porch. "This is bad, this is bad." She turned on the porch light and looked around frantically. "Jake," she called out. "Jake, where are you?" "I thought you said he knew to come home after dark." I knew it wasn't helpful, but I said it anyway. "He does, normally. That's why this is bad. Jake." She stepped further out the door, using the flashlight on her phone. "Will you go check the garage?" she asked me. "He likes to hang out there sometimes. I'm gonna look over there." I said I would, and set off toward the kitchen. Now, mind you, the garage isn't connected to the house. It's a detached garage about 10 yards away on the property. I was still a little paranoid about what Gigi and I felt out in the desert earlier, but I shook it off and walked through the kitchen door, and all 10 yards to the garage. Once inside, I flipped on the light, and began searching. He wasn't under Gigi's grandpa's truck, behind the freezer, or in the tool cabinet. I double-checked, triple-checked every spot he could be. I'd looked everywhere, and there was no sign of a cat. All I could do was put my hands on my head, take a deep breath, and prepare to give Gigi the bad news. I turned the lights off and was about to step out when I heard what sounded like a soft exhale behind me. Immediately I swung around and flipped the lights back on, but again, there was nothing. Actually, there was something. Kind of. Some hairs on the bench next to an open window. Not much, but I hadn't noticed it before. I picked them up and examined them closer. Black hairs, probably Jake's. Maybe he was still close by. I hoped. I turned on my flashlight and ventured back outside. "Jake," I called out into the night. "Are you around here, buddy?" I moved slowly, deliberately, shining my flashlight all about, making sure I didn't miss an inch. "Jake?" Then I heard something move in the sagebrush nearby. "Jake?" I said in a friendly tone. "Here, kitty kitty." I had my light shining down on the bush, only about 10 feet away. I could see the branches twitching and something furry moving inside it. I was sure it was Jake, but the leaves and twigs were casting shadows. I couldn't see him clearly. "Come here, boy." Then the animal emerged from the brush. What it was, I couldn't say, but it wasn't Jake. For a second, I thought it might be a coyote, but this animal was much too large. It looked almost like a dog except for its legs, which were long and skinny, and cloven, like a goat's. It looked at me with very unusual eyes, close set and expressive like a person's. It exhaled and I felt myself tremble. I thought of what Gigi said about not running from predators, so I started calmly backing up towards the house, not even turning my back. It slowly inched towards me as I moved, keeping its gaze on me the entire time. I was getting more and more unnerved the longer it looked at me. Dread opened its eyes. "Stop looking at me," I whimpered, continuing my slow retreat. I was starting to sweat now. My tremble had turned into a full shiver. Something about this animal was not right, not natural. I didn't like the way it was looking at me. It was making me feel crazy, hysterical, like it was putting me under a spell. "Stop looking at me." I tried to command it. It exhaled again, almost like a laugh. I just kept backing up. The light from the porch was getting brighter. I kept thinking I should be there any second. Just a few more steps. But with every step I took, the beast took one too, never getting closer, never letting me get too far away. Always within its grasp, like clay in its hands. Its eyes reminded me. Those eyes. I felt like I was going mad looking into them. They were black at first, weren't they? I had to ask myself because now they were deep, earthy brown. So familiar looking. Finally, I took one more step back, and I felt my hand touch the door handle. I slid open the glass door and got inside as fast as I could, locking it behind me. The animal walked right up to the house, continued staring at me through the glass, but the glass wouldn't stop it. I was sure. The way it looked at me, I knew nothing could stop this beast. It was determined, and it would have me. It would break through the walls and drag me into the night, never to be seen again. It exhaled again and fogged up the window, then turned around and walked back into the darkness. As I left, I felt myself return to normal. Dread went to sleep. Senses came back to me. I could taste my mouth again, feel my skin, hear the blood flow in my head. My whole body had been buzzing, but it was quieting down now, like the spell was wearing off. Then I remembered about Jake. I walked back to the master suite, knowing I'd have to tell Gigi the worst case scenario. Jake was nowhere to be found. And there's a menacing predator lurking about. The porch door was open when I entered the den. Gigi was outside, still calling for Jake. I walked to the doorway. "Gigi?" I called out. She flew back to the house, eyes wide and desperate. "Did you find him? Was he out there?" I wanted to tell her about the creature, but looking in her eyes made the feeling of danger wash away. Her deep brown eyes. What was I thinking before? Had I gone mad? It was just some weird, malnourished wolf, of a breed I'd never seen. Why was I so affected by its stare? Why did it fill me with such dread? I had to laugh at myself. What's funny? She was scowling at me. I forgot we were still in a different kind of crisis. I needed to apologize and tell her I hadn't found Jake, but before I could, we heard a distant sound. We ran out from the master suite to see Jake sitting in the porch light outside the kitchen door, right where the creature was just a few moments ago. You, Gigi chastised him, sliding open the door and letting him inside. He brushed his head against her shins and meowed at her. She picked him up with a soft sigh of relief. We'll have to lock the cat flap so you don't run off again. Gigi and I looked at each other and started laughing again. Why does stuff like this keep happening? I said. I don't know, but let's have that drink. We took a couple shots to celebrate a job well done. Back in the den, Gigi and I found ourselves making out on the couch. Jake was sitting next to us, purring, and the TV was on. The worries of earlier were a distant memory. Everything was back to normal, until we heard the swinging of the cat flap in the door. We never locked it, and he just got outside again. Gigi and I both got up instantly, ready to search for Jake a second time. He couldn't have gotten far. We'll just pick him up, put him back inside, and actually remember to lock the flap this time. I was reaching for the door when we looked down at the flap and saw Jake, but he was inside. But we just heard him leave. Unless he actually came in just now, but then, when did he get out? He was just on the couch next to us. In fact, he was still on the couch. He hadn't moved, but he was also by the door. Our eyes flickered back and forth between the two black cats in the den. Something wasn't right. The Jake by the door started growling, hissing, puffing up its tail. The Jake on the couch jumped down with a growl of his own, and the two cats lunged at each other, screaming and clawing and biting. Not in a playful way either. They scrambled all around the room, becoming one amorphous black shape. I stomped on the ground and yelled, "Hey!" which seemed to scare them both, and they stopped fighting long enough for me to take one to the other room. But now we had another problem. During the fight, we lost track of which cat was which, so now we had to figure out which one was Jake. Gigi looked at her cat, then came and looked at mine. Then she looked at her cat again, and mine one more time. She couldn't tell the difference. They were identical black cats. In order to figure out which was which, she said we should stay in different rooms and study their behavior. My cat was friendly, like Jake, brushing up against me, wanting to be pet. He was clearly trusting of people and comfortable in this house. Gigi's cat was skittish and defensive, and was trying to escape. Confident we found Jake, we shooed Gigi's cat through the open door in the den, and then blocked the cat flap so there would be no more intrusions or escapades for the night. "Do you smell that?" I asked. It hit me out of nowhere, the most god-awful smell I'd ever smelled. It stunk like death. "What is that?" "I think it's from the fighting," Gigi said. "Cats release pheromones when they're in danger. This must be what it smells like." "It's disgusting. Let's go to the living room." I couldn't stand to be in there any longer. It was evoking the same dread I felt when the animal was staring at me, and I wanted to leave that far behind. Thankfully, Gigi agreed, and we grabbed Jake and took him to the living room where we continued watching TV. It was getting late now. Gigi and I were still in the living room. That feeling of being watched was creeping back. I tried to focus on watching TV, but it was hard to ignore. Out here in the living room, the walls are made entirely of windows. But at night, when it's dark out, the windows turn into mirrors. You can't see out, but whatever is out can see in. Dread opened its eyes. The animal was back. I could feel it. It was standing right outside staring at me. I knew it was. The feeling was unmistakable. I couldn't see it, but it was right there, just on the other side of the glass, so close that the window would fog up if it exhaled again. Something moved next to me. I flinched, but it was only Gigi getting up. "What happened?" She laughed at me. "I'm just feeling uneasy. Do your grandparents not have curtains?" I asked. She shook her head. "You have that feeling again?" I nodded. "Well, I'm gonna go take a shower. Maybe go in the guest room and sit on your phone while I'm gone." It was a good idea. There was only one window in there, and it had a curtain. So as Gigi went to the master suite to shower, I went the opposite way. I never got to the guest room, though, as on the way there, I walked past the library. The Peacemaker was still out on the desk next to the Ye Nal Delushi book. Something compelled me, so I opened the book back up to the unsettling picture I saw earlier. I felt a cold breeze, like dread breathing down my neck. I turned the page. The English contents talked about the abilities of the Skinwalker. They are tricksters, cunning, and manipulative. Not only are they shapeshifters, but witches also, and immortal, thrice cursed. Their magic can bewitch the heart, sending their prey into a state of hopeless dread, or a false sense of safety, like a siren's song. The water to the shower turned on, but then right after, Gigi walked out of the room. "Hey, will you do me a huge favor?" she asked. "Will you get me a towel?" I set the book down on the desk. "Where are they?" "In the den." "What? That's right next to you. Just get one." "Please. It smells so gross. I don't want to go in there." I stood my ground. "Just plug your nose. I believe in you." She scrunched up her face into a cute, jokingly angry expression and walked off. I giggled at that. She was adorable. I looked back down at the desk, and this time, my attention was drawn to the revolver. It was heavier than I thought it would be. I checked the rounds. All 6 were loaded. I raised it up and aimed it at myself in the mirror. "Feeling lucky?" I asked myself. Then I heard Gigi call out from the shower, "Hey, what's up?" I shouted back. In a sultry voice she said, "Come join me." She didn't have to tell me twice. Even in her grandparents' shower, I wouldn't say no. I set the gun down on the desk and exited the library, crossed the hall, and walked into the master's suite. The shower room was through the bedroom and to the right, opposite the den. I was just making my way around the corner. I could see Gigi's leg behind a jutting wall, water dripping down the little blue shower tiles, when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was a text from Gigi. "Wait," it said. It caught me completely off guard. I glanced back at Gigi's leg in the shower. I was about to say something to her when I got another text. "Don't go in there." What the hell? Did she have her phone in the shower? Why was she texting me when we were just speaking to each other? Why did she say there and not here? I was so confused. It felt like a puzzle, and I suck at puzzles. Then it clicked. Gigi had never gone back to the shower room. She was still in the den getting a towel. I didn't know who I saw in the shower, but it sure wasn't Gigi. Dread wrapped its arms around me. The voice called out again, "Are you coming, babe?" And my breath caught in my throat. It was Gigi's voice, like, exactly, no doubt about it. It was all too confusing. I didn't know what to believe. Dread held me tight. "I just have to get something real quick." It was the first excuse I could think of. I backed up a few steps. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the door to the den crack open. I was frozen in fear, waiting to see what came out. The trembling was back. Finally, and with caution, Gigi peeked her head out. She was terrified, her skin colorless, and her eyes wide. My phone vibrated again. Gigi held up her phone to show that the text was from her. "Get to the car. I'm going out the porch." I took a deep breath and started backing up out of the bedroom. I just needed to make it to the front door. The car was right outside and we'd be on the way. I inched away as quietly as I could, not daring to move too fast. You don't run from a predator. I'd finally made it out of the bedroom, just around the corner and through the living room, and I'd be at the front door. I heard that thing call out from the shower again in a sweet, sing-song voice. "Don't keep me waiting." Dread kissed me on the lips. I gulped and felt sweat drip down my brow. I had to pick up the pace, or I'd never make it out of here. My teeth were chattering in my skull. I was halfway across the living room floor when I heard wet footsteps coming out of the shower. I glanced behind me. The door was still 10 feet away. Wet footsteps came closer and closer. A shadow stretched across the tiles as it came into the doorway of the bedroom, and I prepared to meet this monstrosity. But when it turned the corner, my heart stopped in my chest. It looked just like Gigi. Same curly black hair, same brown eyes, same face, same body, same freckled skin. I couldn't tell the difference. The sight of her standing there naked, dripping wet, forced me to rethink everything. Did I just make it all up in my head? Do I really believe in skinwalkers? Surely this is my girlfriend, and this whole night has been some delusion. It had to be. The alternative is downright mad. She put her hands on her hips. "Why are you running away from me?" she asked, scrunching up her face into that cute, jokingly angry expression she did. Dread closed its eyes. This was Gigi. Every doubt I had washed away. Even if you could imitate every freckle and curve, mimic expression down to the tiniest detail, you couldn't fake personality. Not like this. My guard was down. I was about to join my girlfriend in the shower when the front door opened behind me. It was Gigi. Her jaw dropped when she saw herself, naked, standing across the room. "We need to get out of here right now," she whispered to me, leaning out the front door. "Babe, what is that thing?" Gigi asked, trying to cover her naked body. I looked at one, and then the other, and then back again. Identical. Both terrified of the other. I didn't know what to do. Behind me across the hall was the library. The Peacemaker should still be on the desk, fully loaded. I turned around and booked it as fast as I could. Both Gigi's ran after me, but I was able to get the gun, cock the hammer, and have it pointed through the door at them before either got too close. "Shoot her, babe," the wet one said. "No, I'm Gigi. I'm your girlfriend," the dry one protested. "She was gonna lure you into the shower and kill you." "She's a skinwalker," the wet one proclaimed. "They're liars, babe. Don't listen to her. She was trying to lure you away from me. What do you think she was gonna do once she got you outside?" I didn't know who to believe. I pointed the gun at the dry one. "No, wait." Dry Gigi pulled her phone out. "I was texting you. You have my number saved. This is proof. Now shoot her." "She stole my phone while I was in the shower. It doesn't prove anything. Please don't listen to her." Dry Gigi sighed, not knowing what to say to convince me. "Listen, if you shoot me, I'm gonna die. It's not enough to kill a skinwalker, but it will kill me. I only ask, once you see that I'm dead, that you shoot her too and run away while you have the chance." Surprisingly, the dread was absent, but I did feel an odd sense of safety. The monster was feeding me comfort now, disarming me. I tried to think. I pointed my gun at the wet one. "Where did we meet?" "School," she said without hesitation. "That's too easy," the dry one protested. "She could have known that through conversations we've had." I pointed my gun at her next. "Whose class did we meet in?" "We had two together, Mr. Dale and Mrs. Brody." The dry one was confident. I pointed my gun back at the wet one. "She's a witch. She can read your mind." "That's not true," the dry one protested. "Skinwalkers can't read your mind. All they can do is deceive you." Two sets of identical brown eyes stared at me, pleading with me. The comfort being exerted on me made it hard to think clearly. I had to go with my gut. The gun was pointed at the wet one. I took a breath and raised my finger to the trigger, but as soon as I touched metal, the wet one darted back into the master's suite. Not wasting any time, Gigi grabbed my hand and yanked me toward the front door. "Come on, let's go," she yelled. But as we were about to grab the handle, the wet one flew out of the den. We ducked down and let it crash into the wooden door above us, then ran back to the library and shut the door. We looked at each other, horrified and out of breath. "What are we gonna do?" I whispered to Gigi. Wet footsteps slowly made their way closer to us, stopping just on the other side of the door. "Here, kitty kitty," it said in a voice unrecognizable. Dread licked its lips. Gigi pointed to the other door on the back side of the library. "That goes to a bathroom, and then down the hall is the guest room. We can leave out the window." We leaned up against the wall as we opened the door to our exit, peeking through the crack before moving forward. Once we cleared the bathroom, we had to go through another door to the hallway. I aimed my gun at the crack as Gigi slowly opened it. All clear. I went first into the hallway, but as Gigi came behind me, the door creaked slightly. We both froze, listening. Wet footsteps. A shadow crept up from behind the corner ahead. Dread drew its breath. I dodged left into the guest room and hid behind the door. Gigi went right into the laundry room. I looked over at the window. There it was, the escape. I was so close to it, but I couldn't leave without Gigi. I had to get to the laundry room. The creature came walking down the hallway. My gun was pointed at the door, as steady as a trembling hand could aim. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps came down the hallway, but never seemed to pass. Dread bared its fangs. With each step, my chest beat harder and harder. I put a hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing. Finally, the footsteps passed me by, walking down the hall toward the library. Once it was several paces away, I silently peeked out the door. The creature didn't look like Gigi anymore. It had lighter hair and shorter and pale skin. With its back to me, I quietly shuffled across the hall into the laundry room. It didn't seem to hear me. The lights were off in the laundry room. I had to use my phone to look around. There was no sign of Gigi. Where had she gone? There must be another way out of here. I looked in the closet, and sure enough, there was a door leading to the living room. I was collecting my nerves, gearing up to follow her out the door, when I heard another voice. Familiar, but not Gigi's this time. It took me a second, but then I realized it was my voice, coming from a different room. "Gigi?" It spoke in a loud whisper, a perfect imitation. I saw it go into the guest room. "Let's make a break for the car." Dread sunk its teeth in me. Footsteps came from the master suite. It was Gigi. I bolted out into the living room to stop her, but the monster was already there, dressed as me, waiting in the trap. As Gigi came around the corner, I aimed my gun at the other me. "Stop," I cried out. The creature turned to face me, smiling, taunting. I was looking into my own eyes. It had my face, my body, my expression down to the tiniest detail. Dread opened its mouth wide. Was I still me? Could I be, if something else was too? If no one could tell the difference? If I couldn't tell the difference, was I ever really me? The monster cried out in my voice. "Stop looking at me." Dread swallowed me whole. I was paralyzed. My vision narrowed until all I saw was black. I fell back to the floor, dropping the gun. I couldn't even crawl away as it walked up to me. Only, as it approached me, it became Gigi again. A light glowed behind her. She was the only thing I could see. She leaned over and stretched out her hand. "I'm offering you peace," she told me. "Won't you take it?" Her smile pierced through me, and just like that, the dread washed away again. and serenity took its place. Something in me changed. I finally understood. If I was going to die, I should feel at peace about it. The creature was offering me comfort. There's bliss in accepting the lie. Yes, she assured me. Don't fight anymore. You can rest now. I let her take my hand. She lifted me up off the floor and looked at me. Those eyes, her brown eyes, they welcomed me. I felt myself on the brink of passing over to somewhere else. The feeling of bliss was overwhelming, all-encompassing. But creeping up behind it, I felt an itch, a strong itch, strong and deep down to the bone. Then I heard the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. When my vision returned, Gigi was on the floor screaming and writhing. There was a hole in her chest already rotting. Confused, ears ringing, I frantically looked around to see what happened. Standing by the door was Gigi, trembling, white knuckles gripped around the peacemaker, a thin flume of smoke billowing from the barrel. The creature struggled in agony on the floor. Its skin turned to feathers, then to wool, then to fur. It stumbled to its feet, walking on all four paws that suddenly became hooves. Each time it turned into something recognizable, it changed again, almost shimmering. Antlers started to crown its head. In one last cry of pain, it broke through the glass of the kitchen door and ran off into the darkness. I thought I would feel relief, but as the creature disappeared, so did the peaceful serenity. It left me feeling hollow, save for the itch. Gigi looked at me and started crying. I couldn't cry. I had felt so much, so intensely. To be free of it now felt like its own death. I couldn't feel relief, or joy, or fear, or pain. Just an itch. Am I dead? I managed to ask. Gigi shook her head, sobbing. I couldn't understand why she was crying. It's all right, I said. It won't be coming back. I was so drained. It was all I could think of to comfort her. Let's go home. We don't have to be here anymore. She put her face in her hands and sobbed. We can't go home, she said. What do you mean? Why not? It marked you. It marked me? I looked down at my hand, the one that itched. It was turning dark, like I was frostbitten. My fingers felt rigid. I tried to curl them, but they stayed stiff. The itch was unbearable. I scratched it with my other hand, and to my horror, my rotten flesh peeled away, revealing long black talons. There it was again. Dread opened its eyes. What do we do? I asked. It only made her cry harder. I inched toward her, but she backed away terrified. Gigi, what do we do? She shook her head. I gulped. Dread drew its breath. Cut it off. The words just came out. I didn't even think about them. What? Get a knife and cut it off, I demanded, before it spreads. Through tears, she cried, It's not like that. It's not like that. The words echoed off the glass walls and high ceilings. I fell back to the ground once more, knowing this desert would be my home forever. Dread lovingly embraced me. My face felt different now. I looked at the window to see my reflection. My nose and mouth were turning into a beak. I tried to cry. I screamed for Gigi to run away, but I couldn't make words. I squawked. Dread, dread, dread. It was all-consuming. I couldn't take it anymore. I wouldn't end up like that horrid creature, doomed to roam the desert, immortal, thrice cursed. You know my name, I tried to say, but the words wouldn't come out. Dread laughed at me. Say my name. I tried again. Gigi steadied her breathing. I don't know how, but I think she knew what I meant. She pointed the gun at me and pulled the trigger. My shoulder exploded. Bone fragments shot through me. The force knocked me across the floor. The pain was like nothing I'd ever known. Like my blood turned to acid and was melting through my tissue. Black smoke rose from the wound, already festering. Dread opened its mouth wide. I screamed. We'd become one. I was crawling towards Gigi, snarling at her, baring my teeth. She stepped away, horrified. I almost felt ashamed, but the dread wouldn't let me. I was its puppet. Dread wore my skin. Gigi shot again, this time in my leg. The bone breaking was excruciating, but it stopped me from crawling. I laid there screaming, blood leaking out of me as my body tried to transform. "Say my name," I screamed at Gigi, hoping she'd understand. She raised the gun again. "Patrick," I heard her say. I never felt a third shot. Dread was all that remained. I had been thinking about picking up a part-time job for a while now. The semester was over and I got a bunch of free time on my hands. Might as well make a bit of cash in the meantime. And so my search on LinkedIn began. I was looking for something simple and stress-free, preferably something I could do with minimal effort while staring at my phone to pass the time. I spent hours browsing through the sea of options. The majority of what I found were graphic design commissions, tutoring, and waiting tables, which I either lacked the skills for or just found unappealing. Just when I was about to give up, I stumbled onto a post requesting for a babysitter. The post was vague, only including an address and a phone number. Typically, I would have just scrolled past this post and not given it a second thought, but I immediately noticed that the address was conveniently close to where I live. I decided to at least find out more. The call was answered before the first ring could finish. "For the last time, I don't want to answer your stupid surveys." I could hear in the background a chaotic symphony of the TV, the sound of a vacuum, and a child crying. I'm calling about the babysitting job." I feared for what I might be getting myself into. I had no prior experience taking care of children, and it sounded like I was throwing myself into the deep end of the pool with this one. Oh, yes, the babysitting job. Yes, thank God. It's been a nightmare trying to find one. Look, I'm running late and I've got about 100 errands I need to get to. If you can get here in half an hour and look after my kids for 3 to 4 hours, 5 max, I'll pay you whatever you want. A part of me felt bad for how desperate this man sounded. The other part of me was worried about the storm I might have to weather for the next 5 hours. The other part of me kept replaying the words, "I'll pay you whatever you want," in my head. "I'll see you in 20 minutes. 15 minutes later, I found myself in front of apartment 4H. The entire complex seemed old, likely built in the 80s, yet the red wallpaper, mahogany accents, and soft carpeting gave it the feel of a luxurious hotel. I could hear the same chaotic storm I had previously heard on the phone brewing inside. I felt hesitant, but I already came all this way. I raised my hand up to knock, only for the door to fly open as I did. "Oh, hello. You're the babysitter, right?" The man didn't look how I pictured him at all. He wore a clean, navy-colored suit and had a tall, muscular build. He was mostly well put together besides his deep sunken eye bags, messy curly hair, and unevenly shaved stubble. Despite it all, he was actually quite handsome. "Yep, that's me," I confirmed. "You're a fast one. Caught me by surprise." He chuckled. "Please come in." I walked into the small apartment and followed him into the living room. There I witnessed 2 small boys, who both looked to be about 7 or 8. Fighting over a small green figure of a toy soldier. The entire living room was littered with hundreds of these soldiers and tanks scattered haphazardly across the carpeted floor. I almost didn't notice the little girl in the black dress on the couch. She sat motionless staring at the TV. Master Chef was playing. Junior. "Hey guys, settle down please," the man ordered sternly. The 3 children stopped their antics and simultaneously jerked their heads around to stare at me. "Daddy's gonna be gone for a little while, alright? This nice lady here is Emily." Emily is going to look after you guys. When I'm gone, she's in charge. So be on your best behavior. I don't want a repeat of last time. The children collectively gave a silent, enthusiastic nod. Good. The man then turned to me. Emily, meet Khan. The man caught himself mid-sentence. Silly me. I meant to say meet Zalos. The one in the white shirt and Martius, the one in red. They're twins. And Limos, the girl. Strange names, I thought. The three children waved their little hands at me as their names were called. I awkwardly waved back. Perfect. Bathroom is the door on the left, he said as he gestured towards the connecting hallway with 4 doors. 1 on the left, 2 on the right, and 1 at the end of the hall. And you can help yourself to anything in the fridge. Make yourself at home. Just don't go into the room at the end of the hall. That's off limits. Yeah, no problem, I assured him. You might hear something inside and... A buzzing noise interrupted him as he frantically fished around his pocket, pulling out a phone. Shoots. I really need to get going. He took his wallet out and, without taking his eyes off of his phone, handed me a thick wad of cash. Here, order some takeout with this if they get peckish. Before I could think of asking questions, the man disappeared out the door. I could respect an exhausted single father trying to make it through the day, but he seemed awfully irresponsible leaving me, a stranger, with his kids. I turned back to the 3 children, staring at me with blank expressions. Looks like I'm outnumbered, guys, I joked, trying to break the ice. They remained silent. The girl, Limos, lost quickly interest and turned her attention back to the TV. The boys craned their necks upward, studying me. Somehow, I felt as if they were looking down on me. So, how's the battle going, fellas? I asked, attempting again to rid the awkward tension. Would you like to play? Martius asked. No, Zalos began to protest. Father said she was in charge. Zalos glared at Martius, furious for even suggesting the idea that someone join their campaign. I thought it best that I remained neutral. After all, I was trying to take the next few hours as easy as possible. No, it's alright. Thanks, though. You guys carry on. I stood straight, furrowed my brows, and gave them a salute, doing my best impression of a soldier. Very well, said Martius as he saluted back. I joined Limos on the couch, who, upon a closer look, appeared thin and skinny. It was to the point where I was genuinely concerned that she had some kind of illness. Perhaps anorexia. The small girl piped up with a soft, quiet voice. Can we eat? I'm hungry. Of course we can, sweetheart, I told her, trying my best to show how concerned I was for her. Pizza ought to do some good. We waited for the delivery to arrive. During that time, the boys played on their battlefield, and Limos laid on the couch next to me, her only presence being that of sharp breaths. I found it rather cute that the boys weren't smashing the tanks together and throwing toy soldiers at each other like I expected children their age would do. They looked as if they were competent generals of the Great Apartment War and had to send their loyal men to die on no man's carpet. They paced around the battlefield, stroking their chin, careful not to step on any of the small soldiers. I looked over at the little girl sitting next to me. She stared wide-eyed at the TV, mesmerized by the food. Although pizza would be arriving soon, I thought I might as well rummage around the fridge and cupboard for some snacks. I got up from the couch, which alerted Zalos. Where do you think you're going? He questioned. Just gonna see if you guys have any snacks. They're not for you, stranger. You think you can just come here and take what you want? I'll be the first to admit that I didn't conduct myself with the maturity of my age, but something about this disrespectful little brat got on my nerves. I recall your dad saying I was in charge and to help myself do whatever I please, I mocked, putting on a posh accent, mimicking that of loyalty. Bitch. I was appalled to hear such a young boy be so vulgar and rude. I wanted to discipline him, I wanted to let him know that he was to respect me, that he should listen to what I say and learn to quickly apologize. In hindsight, this didn't feel like me at all. I came here to make a quick buck. Why did I care so much about enduring insults from children? At that moment, I very much did care. I straightened my posture to look as imposing as possible and stomped my foot down as hard as I could, just to try and make him flinch. As I did, I felt a sharp sting of pain shoot up my leg. I fell back onto the couch and lifted my foot onto my knees to inspect what had caused the pain. It was a toy soldier's bayonet. The soldier's arm was half torn off, only attached to the torso by a thin strip of green plastic. I slowly pulled the sharp plastic piece out of my foot, leaving a small stain of blood on my socks. "Shit," I blurted aloud. I looked up to see Zalos and Martius staring at me. Zalos, as expected, looked livid that I had broken his toy. Martius, on the other hand, looked at the broken soldier that now laid on the carpet, the tip of its bayonet now covered in a dark tint of red. He had a mournful look on his face. "Guys, I'm sorry." I apologized, the anger I had felt quickly fading away. "I'll buy you a new one, I promise." "That wasn't how it was supposed to go." Zalos exploded. "Zalos, please. I'll replace it for you the next time I come over, okay?" "He can't be replaced," said Martius, as he got on his knees and gingerly picked up the soldier. He brought it to a small jar that rested on the coffee table. The jar was half filled with green plastic soldier parts, a loose collection of hands, feet, heads, and torsos. Martius carefully sets the soldier. He held on to the top of the pile. "You guys really shouldn't just leave these toys on the floor like this." Martius shot a furious glare at me in response to that comment. "I don't care if you're in charge. It's not fair." Then I did something I regretted. I giggled. I found it amusing how they were so immersed in this game of theirs. I tried to stop myself, especially when I saw how the twins were fuming. I'm really sorry, guys. I'll make it up to you, I promise." "You don't understand. This is not a mistake easily amendable. But perhaps..." Martius stopped, turning to Zalos. The two of them seemed to have a silent conversation between themselves. Zalos, with tears welling up in his eyes, gave Martius a solemn nod. Zalos reached into his pockets, took out another toy soldier. He handed it to Martius, who in turn presented it to me. This one was different. It was a bit shorter and had a smaller build. It was a woman, in the same soldier uniform and equipped with identical gear as the rest. This was my first close look at these toys, and I was impressed with how detailed they were, down to the intricate facial features. I was puzzled by the realization. I was sure I was just overthinking it, but the small green face that stared back at me was mine. Before I could examine it further, Martius quickly snatched the toy from my grasp. He marched back to the center of the carpet battlefield, with my soldier in hand. "Perhaps we can make you understand," said Martius as he places the soldier down on the carpet. "Wait, give that," I started to say. I never got to finish my sentence. I don't know which of the assaults on my senses alerted me first. Was it the awful smell of sulfuric odor, the metallic scent of blood, and the acrid tang of gunpowder? Was it the thick, gritty taste of ash and smoke that lingered in the air? Was it the chorus of unintelligible screams, and the staccato of machine gun fire that flew overhead? Regardless, what caught my attention the most was the soldier in front of me. He sat slumped into the mud and filth of the trench we were in. I knew he was dead just by the look on his face. His eyes barely open, lazily staring at me. His jaws hung slack, with a river of blood trickling from the edge of his lips. As for the rest of his body, it had been contorted to a mangled mess of flesh. His arms, attached to the torso by only a strip of sinew. His hands still held on tightly to his weapon, a rifle with a fixed bayonet. Just a moment ago, I had been sitting on a couch in the living room in a small apartment downtown. I blinked and everything changed so abruptly. I couldn't even begin to comprehend what had happened to me. The mud I sat on was softened by either rainwater or blood. It was cold, and the moisture seeped into the uniform I now wore. Somehow sinking deeper into the ground gave me the slightest notion of comfort. Perhaps no one would notice me, I thought. I could pass for another corpse amongst the hundreds. And so I stayed quiet, holding myself back from screaming or crying. I tried remaining still, but I couldn't stop my heart from furiously beating or my teeth from chattering. I plugged my ears with my filthy fingers, covered in dirt and soot, desperately attempting to shield myself from the horrible blood-curdling screeches that could barely be said to have come from a human. I breathed small gasps of ashy air to avoid having to smell the rot. I took one last look at the dead soldier before shutting my eyes. I would have kept them shut too if I didn't catch a flicker of movement. He blinked. My eyes shot wide open, staring intently into the soldier's soulless eyes. His eyelids began to flutter, his fingers twitched, his ankles shifted ever so slightly. Then, without warning, his upper body heaved forward, lunging towards me. Its lower body didn't follow, and his spine immediately disconnected with a sickening crack. He landed at my feet, face planting in the mud, and returned to being inanimate. I almost let out a yelp, but it caught in my dry throat. I thought that maybe some explosive shockwave had simply knocked him over. Suddenly his arm, attached only by a chipped bone and strips of exposed muscles, flung upwards, grabbing me by my leg. I screamed, but only a raspy gasp resonated as my vocal cords strained and burned. I kicked at the corpse, but it refused to release its grasp. With surprising force and speed, it yanked itself towards me so that its torso landed on my knees. I felt the soft tissue of its dismembered half resting on me. Its body slumped onto mine, and its face pressed right against my ears as I turned away. I refused to look at the monster. Surely I was in hell. Then softly a whisper resonated deeply over the deafening sounds of the battle. The soldier croaked into my ears with a plea. I beg of you, please, the Pale Rider. A bell rang in the distance. Like a wave, the sound washed over me, and in an instant, everything fell away. The cries, the rot, the filth, and the corpse, all gone. The familiar sound of the TV and the fresh, breathable air reassured me that I was back in the apartment, sitting on the floor, leaning against the couch. It was such a surreal and abrupt shift of scenery. I could have almost convinced myself it had all been in my head. That wasn't until I saw Martius stood where he had been previously, holding a small green soldier in his hand. He looked at me, no longer with the look of anger, but of pity. I flinched as he began making his way towards me, careful of where he stepped. He crouched down next to me, took my hand, and placed the figure onto my palm. I didn't need to look to know that it was my figure he had given me. Take better care of this one, he said to me as if I was a child in his eyes. The familiar note of the bell that had pulled me back to the apartment rang once again. It took me a moment to gather my thoughts and realize that it was the doorbell I had been hearing. Someone was at the door. "Pizza time!" Limos shouted excitedly. Slowly I pushed myself off the floor, found my balance, then began making my way towards the door. I'm sure many of you in my shoes would have taken this opportunity to escape. Likewise, I had made the decision that I was going to run fast and far the moment I opened the door, leaving this accursed apartment of demonic children. No amount of money could be worth what I had just experienced. I found myself in a small sprint as I neared the door. My hand shot out towards the handle, and I forcefully yanked the door open, pulling myself into the hallway. I was greeted by the fragrance of pizza and nothing. Utter darkness. The hallway I had entered from earlier now void of any light besides the faint glow coming from the apartment. All that seemed to exist within the hallway was me and the box of pizza on the floor. Dominoes. I stood there contemplating on what to do. Perhaps the electricity had just simply gone out. That was fine because I recalled where the stairwell was located. I could still escape. Are you going to share? Limos's voice from behind startled me. I leapt away from her and the apartment, deeper into the hall. She was standing at the threshold of the apartment. Between the two of us, the pizza box sat patiently. Please, she pleaded. I'm so hungry. The look on her face read of desperation. The black dress she wore appeared to hang loosely on her body. I was sure it fitted her earlier, but now it seemed a few sizes too big. Please, she begged again. The pale one is close. There was again the mention of this pale thing. Upon hearing this ominous omen, I turned around and blindly sprinted in the opposite direction down the hall where I remembered the stairs to be. It had to be there. My foot stamped and beat against the door as I bolted in a straight line. In the pitch black, it was impossible to see how close I was. I fully expected to eventually run into a wall. No obstacle ever came. It's not something you can outrun. Limos spoke again. The volume of her voice noticeably hadn't faltered with the distance I had traveled. I stopped in my tracks. I turned to face her thinking she had followed me. She hadn't. She still remained at the threshold of the apartment doorway. The pizza box still laid on the floor between us, and I stood where I had been at the start, a mere few feet out the apartment. It's not the fastest, but it'll catch you. She spoke as I struggled to catch my breath. It always does. What is this? I asked her, demanding the child for an answer. I was at a loss. Everything certain that I built my understanding of the world on had crumbled away. What was left was anger and fear, like a small mouse cornered and out of options. It's pizza. What is this place? I yelled back, finally losing my temper. I never thought myself capable of hurting a child, but at that moment, I was prepared to do so. Domino. Enough! I screamed as I lunged at her, attempting to do something horrible. I reached out to grab her by the collar of her dress. She didn't step backwards or attempt to dodge, yet somehow she shifted ever so slightly out of my reach. I fell flat on my face onto the cold, solid floor, now noticing that I wasn't even sure what I had been standing on. I felt pain, followed by blood trickling out of my nose. It most certainly wasn't the soft, carpeted floor I recalled when first arriving at this apartment complex. As I laid prone on the floor, I stared up at the frail girl who now stood above me with an imposing presence. Behind her, the light of the apartment, in stark contrast to the darkness, made her figure a dark silhouette. I felt defeated. I didn't even try to stand back up. I may not have been sure where I was, but the ground felt solid and tangible. It was something I could be certain of, and that brought me comfort. What is this? I asked again. This time my question came out quivering. Limos crouched down, inspecting me as if I was a small insect she found crawling across the floor. The path, she answered. What does that mean? Are you hungry? She asked me, ignoring my question. Her concern sounded genuine. I wanted to tell her I wasn't, since food was the least of my worries, but as soon as she asked, it was as if she reminded my body of the idea of hunger. I felt starved. I felt hunger like I had never felt before. My stomach curled and cramped within me, screaming for sustenance. The aroma of the pizza now overpowering all my senses. I could almost taste the fragrance in the air itself. Yes. Are you strong? She asked again. I hesitated to answer. How could I be strong in the state I was in? Do you want to live? Yes, please. Please let me live. I begged her. Please help me. I want to live too, she said as she began stepping towards the pizza box. She gently lifted the cardboard box open, and the smell of the bubbling cheese, tomato sauce, and pepperoni had me salivating. I immediately mustered up my last bit of strength and brought myself to my hands and knees. I crawled in the direction of the beckoning food, yet quickly realized I was making no progress. As if I was on a hamster wheel, I simply could not move any closer. I started to crawl faster with more desperation, and before long, I had gotten onto my feet. I stumbled toward the little girl, who was now hunched over the pizza box on the floor with her back facing me. My stumbling sped up until I jogged, then ran, then to a full-on sprint. No matter how fast or slow I went, I made no progress. They were right there in front of me. I was so close, yet so infinitely far. All I could do was move in place, watching Limos scarf down each slice before me. As she gleefully ate, my only thought was the dwindling food left for me when I eventually reached the pizza box. She was going to eat it all for herself and leave me with nothing. I couldn't let that happen. One after another, the slices of pizza disappeared down her gluttonous gullet. I remember begging her to help me, to toss me just a bit, to save some for me. She never bothered to turn around. I yelled and screamed, but eventually I grew too tired to do so. Finally, it came down to the final slice. She reached for it like she did the others. As I felt the last bit of my strength drain in desperation, I tried leaping towards her one last time. I fully assumed I would just land on my face as I did before, no closer to salvation. Yet I held out hope. I think that was what did it. Desperate, violent hope. One last act of defiance against the inevitable death. This time, I felt myself propel forward, and for the first time, Limos rapidly approached me. I slammed into the small, frail child, landing on top of her with incredible force. She yelped in surprise and pain as I felt her brittle right arm snap under the weight of my knee. In that moment, not only did I dismiss the injury I caused her, I felt retribution, as it was revenge for watching me suffer. I quickly turned my attention to the box of pizza, which to my horror was now empty. Furious, I turned back to Limos, who I now saw in her right hand, despite the pain of her fractured arm, still held on to the last slice. Without hesitation, I ripped it out of her hand and forcefully shoved it down my throat. I expected it to taste like the most savory, delicious bite, and yet, as my taste buds familiarized itself with the gooey slop, I was met with the disgusting taste of rot. Involuntarily, I threw up what was left in my stomach. Black, viscous liquid poured out of my mouth along with the half-chewed pizza. It appeared molded and putrid, as if it had been neglected for months. Dark, moldy spots of purple and green hue festered on the crust. Small specks of pale maggots writhed in the spoiled cheese and toppings. I spat onto the floor, attempting to wash the terrible taste that lingered. "No!" Limos shrieked in horror, as I keeled over the pile of vomit in excruciating pain. With my knee still holding her down by her broken arm, she began to struggle with a surprising spur of strength. I watched as she gracefully tugged on her fractured arm, steam exuding from her elbow. Gradually her arm stretched and strained as she pulled. I was too weak and terrified to stop her. With a wail of pain and triumph, she slid the bone of her forearm out of her arm as if it were a sleeve made of muscle and skin. The motion was so smooth it was like pulling the bone out of a tenderized rib. Upon freeing herself, she pushed me aside and with her one arm, scooped the black vile mass into her mouth. The sound of animalistic slurping and feral grunts was all I heard. No traces of humanity were left. As she devoured the filth with reckless abandon, my attention turned to the steaming flesh that she left behind. I feared a part of me knew that I was not far from descending to her level of madness. It reminded me of the burning smell of human flesh from the trenches. I reached out to it, piping hot to the touch. I grabbed onto the wrist and with a revolting squish, The skin and muscle fiber fell apart like pulled pork. Just then a shadow casted over me. A figure loomed before me, covering the light of the apartment. Pathetic. Zalos taunted with a disgusted look of pity on his face. I could only imagine what he saw of me. Then he slammed the door shut, leaving me shrouded in true darkness. I wasn't sure how long I was there for. The awful sound of Limo's savagery quickly died out as she finished what was left of my excretion. After that, it was hard to tell how much time had passed. I stayed groveling on the ground, my hand still held on to the warm, moist lump of the girl's discarded flesh. My hunger grew even stronger, before I couldn't bring myself to do it, to stoop so low, to even think of consuming my own. It was abominable. I thought it better to be starved to death, to finally be free of this nightmare. I don't expect anyone to understand or condone my actions, but know that I was pushed to the brink of my sanity. A deep primal urge within me wanted so desperately to live, to survive at any cost. So reluctantly, I held the mass of flesh and slowly brought it to my mouth, thankful that at the very least I could not see what I had to do. As I choked on the gamey meat through sobs, I heard a shuffle sound approach me. I couldn't see her, but I knew Limos was standing right next to me while I chewed on her member. "You are strong," she whispered. Within the void, a blinding light washed over us. I squinted my eyes and in an instant, just as seamless as it had been in the trench, I found myself back in the apartment, except this time it was quiet and empty. The TV had been turned off, and the floor was cleared of the toys. The insatiable hunger I had felt mere moments ago faded away. The only thing I felt of the horrors in the abyss was the vile aftertaste that continued to linger. It quickly came to my realization that I appeared to be alone in the apartment. I got up and did a quick scan of the living room and the kitchen to confirm it. I was alone. Perhaps they had retreated back into their rooms. I looked down the halls to the bedrooms, which now appeared more threatening and ominous, as if some new terror lurks behind each door. Once again I found myself with an opportunity to escape. This time, however, I feared using the front door and ending up back in that terrible purgatory. The next method of exit would be out the window. I could still hear the sound of bustling pedestrians and traffic outside. It calmed me knowing that I was still somewhat connected with the outside world. I was 4 stories up with no safe way of getting down, but at that point, I was content with simply risking the fall. To my disappointment, the window refused to budge when I tried lifting it open. It was an old wooden framed window with no locks on it. Through some supernatural means, it was simply immovable. On the verge of a breakdown, I grabbed the nearest solid object to me, which was a desk lamp, and proceeded to smash it into the glass as hard as I could. I couldn't even leave a scratch. Feeling at a loss, I reluctantly tried the door once again. Slowly and carefully, I opened the door, making sure that I kept myself within the confines of the apartment. To my relief, I was no longer greeted by the abyss. The hallway had turned to its original state. Hesitantly, I stepped out into the hallway. As I crossed the threshold out the apartment, a faint cry emanated from behind me. It was the sound of an infant bawling. I flinched as the crying broke the eerie silence. It's odd that the sound of a helpless baby crying could invoke such fear within me, but nevertheless I sprinted out of the apartment and ran for the stairwell. My heart pumped furiously as I sprinted as fast as I could away from the danger, taking 2 or 3 steps at a time. As I reached the ground level, I bursted out the stairwell door into the lobby. I found myself standing at the threshold of apartment 4H. The baby's crying now intensified. I turned back, expecting the stairwell I had just exited to still be behind me. The same hallway on the 4th floor greeted me. After being led on with the hopes of escape only to be denied it once again, I fell onto my knees and wept. For the next few hours I cried along with the infant. In the lasting moments I stayed idle. The sunlight from the window never seemed to dim. The father, The man who lured me into this abstract, non-Euclidean prison was yet to return, and I doubted he ever will. Eventually my crying ceased as my eyes ran dry. The infant, however, continued its tantrum alone. Its lungs never tired or faltered. Hours, perhaps even days go by. In the time, I've attempted multiple times to escape. My phone had no signal or connection, and any attempt to reach the outside world failed. I tried the stairwell again, only to find myself back in the apartment every time. I went knocking on the neighboring apartment doors, only to be met with silence. When I tried forcing my way in, to my surprise, none of the doors were locked. Only it seemed every apartment was apartment 4H. The elevator, no matter what floor I chose, always opened to apartment 4H. I never grew hungry or thirsty. I never tried to sleep. I just existed in this static space where the sun never waned. The scenery unchanged, and the crying endless. I felt the essence of my soul dim. I had fought with all I had and committed heinous atrocities for the right to live. Now as I sat on the kitchen floor, feeling the sharp, cool edge of a kitchen knife brush against my neck, I wondered why I had fought so hard. It's okay to give up now, right? I've tried everything. I'm at the end of the road. With my eyes shut, my grip on the blade's handle tightened as I slowly pressed the sharp edge firmly against my throat. I applied pressure slowly, still fearing the last stretch of pain before I could finally rest. I'm scared, a child's voice piped up. I froze, unable to even breathe. I hesitated to open my eyes. I could hear the child sniffling and whimpering in front of me. I had gotten so used to it. The sudden absence of the baby's cries unnerved me. "Can you stay with me?" they asked, in a high-pitched, shrill voice. It was the voice of a little girl, but it didn't sound like limos. I still held the blade closely to my neck with eyes shut tightly. It felt reassuring that I could end the torment any time I wanted to finally hold my own life in my hand. It gave me a sense of courage. My eyelids loosened and my vision fluttered open, expecting to see a small child. Instead, towering over me was an old woman. She was impossibly tall to the point she had to hunch over to avoid the ceiling. She stood naked, covered only by her long, unkempt gray hair. Her ashen skin, although saggy and wrinkled, were clean and eerily pale. It was like the first hint of snowfall on a solstice, where soft, curved patches of snow layered atop another. I didn't notice a hint of blemish or imperfection. Her face, however, was that of a child. Up to her neck, her skin becomes smooth like porcelain. Youth was distilled on only her facial features: button nose, wide eyes, small pink lips, and rounded cheeks. She looked at me with tears welling up in her puppy eyes. "Can you read to me?" she asked, in the same childish voice. It was uncanny to see the thing speak. I remained silent, unsure of how to respond. She raised her bony hand and reached her thin fingers towards me. "Don't," I hissed, turning the knife onto her. She quickly retracted her hand and backed away, retreating to the far end of the kitchen. For a moment I felt relieved to see this creature feared me as much as I feared it. The moment was short-lived as her brow tightened, her cheeks flushed, and her mouth tensed. She looked like she was about to burst. Why do you still resist? Why can't you just stay with me? It won't hurt. It won't hurt ever again." "What are you?" I demanded. She looked at me curiously. Her face softened, as if comprehending my question. "I'm the last one," she answered. "I'm what's left when everyone is gone." Her expression shifted back to sadness, and I watched as a single streak of tear ran down her cheek. "It's lonely," she sniveled. "I can't stay." Through her watery eyes, she cracked a warm smile. "You will. You always do." The way she said it didn't sound like a threat. Is there a way to leave? I asked, my eyes darting towards the open door to the hallway. Her eyes followed mine out the door. Then she looked back at me, shaking her head. What can I do then? You can rest, she said. Finally. The sweetness in her tone made the idea sound rather comfortable. Or, she hesitated, or you can put me to rest. What happens if I do that? I questioned, intrigued by an alternative choice. Then I'll see you again, down the road. So I can leave? For now, you'll be back soon enough. She reached towards me, handing me a card I hadn't previously noticed. Cautiously, I held it by the corner and took it. It was a Polaroid. The image is blurry and yellowed by time. The photograph depicted an extreme wide shot of a beautiful meadow. In the distance, 4 horses frolicked in the tall grass. I looked back at her, wondering what she was trying to tell me. With a grin on her face, she excitedly twirls her finger around, signaling for me to turn the photo. I flipped it over and saw that written on the back in beautiful cursive handwriting was a poem. Read to me, she said, as she made her way onto the couch in the living room. She sat down, curling herself into the corner. She patted the cushion next to her, beckoning for me to join. I set the knife down on the kitchen counter and complied. With a gentle tone, as if singing a lullaby, I began to read the poem aloud. Dawn heralded the coming of their steeds, each rider a calamity of man's sinful deeds. I glanced at her to see her nodding in approval. Keep going. I continued on to the next line. First came conquest, who bolstered the pride of man. The white messenger's taunt is where it all began. Then war swiftly followed, with fiery hate in his heart. The red knight's blade spilled blood, torn flesh apart. Next crept famine, that consumed the very last bite. The black witch's spell shrouded the world with blight. My voice cracks, as I'm reminded of the corpse and the abyss. My mouth felt dry and a chill ran down my spine. I pressed on. Finally arrived death, as they all wept and grieved. The pale lady's touch gently granted them reprieve. My speech faltered as the realization dawned on me. The pale rider, I muttered under my breath. I turned to see her eyes closed and her expression softened. She breathed steadily, her chest heaving with each inhale. Even though she was asleep, I proceeded to read the final line of the poem to myself. One after another the domino falls, until dusk whisks the horsemen back to their stalls. As I finished, I felt a tear fall across my face. A tremendous wave of relief washed over me, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. Like for the first time in my life, I could truly breathe. Thank you, I told her as she slept. But not today. I can endure it for a bit longer. Then I watched the folds and sags of her skin tighten. Her body shrunk before me, her hair retracted back into their follicles, until laying beside me was an infant. I carefully picked her up and carried her down the hall in the final room at the end. As I did, I walked past the 3 other rooms, the doors to which now hung open. In the first door on the right, I saw Zalos and Mardius sleeping in a bunk bed. I peeked inside, shut the lights off, and closed the door as quietly as I could. I continued down the hall, and in the second door on the right, I saw Limos shivering in a fetal position on her bed. I walked over and pulled a blanket over her. Instantly her body relaxed and her breathing calmed. Again, I turned the lights off and closed the door behind me. On to the final room at the end of the hall. Carefully balancing the infant in one arm, I turned the doorknob and stepped through. This room was by far the largest and most empty. Only 3 things took up any space. A crib in the center of the room, a small cot tucked away in the corner, and a wooden rocking horse painted white. On the horse, carved the phrase, Moros, who stole our pain. I carefully set the child down in her crib and watched her nestle comfortably. Her breathing was gentle and rhythmic. With each exhale, a delicate sigh escaped. She looked so fragile and serene, as if held in a moment untouched by time. The soft rays of the afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across her smooth, pale skin. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" The voice of a man came from behind me. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it was still familiar. "She is," I replied, not taking my eyes off the child. The man joined me at my side, and the two of us shared a quiet moment adoring the child. "This is as close as I can be to her," he said somberly, "and yet you choose to continue suffering." "It's not always suffering. There are moments like these that make the pain worth it." "Perhaps, but you live as long as I have, experience the highest of highs and the lowest of low. I tire of this infinite stasis. I yearn for the day I shut my eyes for the last time." He spoke with no emotion. As heart-wrenching as his words were, it was as if he's said them before countless times. There was only one question on my mind. After encountering conquest, war, famine, and now death, I wondered just who this man who claimed to be their father was. "I know you're thinking what kind of man I am to deserve this fate," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "It's not a divine punishment to care for them. It's a father's duty, after all. They are born of my sin. I may have fathered humanity's ruin, but to see my fellow man struggle and fight, refusing to let their next breath be their last, I am in awe of your resilience." I should have felt hatred towards the man. I should have held him responsible for the horrors I endured. Yet, without another word shared between us, I stepped away from the crib and took my leave. I shut the door as I left, the last thing I saw being the man standing over his child, his fists clenched so tightly that beads of blood trickled down the creases of his hands. I walked out the apartment, descended down the stairwell, entered into the lobby, and finally, I stepped out of the building onto the bustling sidewalk. If not for the Polaroid tucked away in my pocket, I might have tried to convince myself that it was all a fever dream for the sake of my sanity. I took the photo out just to confirm it. I studied it for a moment, confused that the picture had now changed. In place of the 4 horses that ran across the horizon now stood 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. They watched as before them, a lone man stood atop a corpse with a caved-in skull, a bloodied stone in his hand. I flipped the Polaroid over, and as I had predicted, the poem had also been replaced, and now simply read, "The Folly of Cain." "I think I need to go to rehab." My heart dropped when I heard that. It came out of nowhere. The woman I was married to and living with had been struggling in the throes of addiction, and I was none the wiser. I had never felt so taken aback. "Carrie, what do you mean? I don't understand where this is coming from," I said, gingerly taking her hand in mine. "Exactly what I said. I need help, John. I've been drinking again. Like, a lot." My mouth involuntarily fell open. Carrie had admitted to having alcohol dependency after graduating from college, but had always been under the impression that she'd nipped it in the bud. "Honey, how long has this been going on? I never would have guessed if you hadn't told me," I replied, taking a step back. "I know," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "It's been 6 months. I've been drinking vodka to hide the smell. That nightly glass of wine, it's actually cranberry juice and Smirnoff. I've been throwing the empty bottles in the dumpster behind my work so you wouldn't catch on. I'm sorry that I kept this from you. I really am. I just couldn't bear the thought of losing you over it." Carrie broke down, tears streaking down her cheeks. Hey, I would never leave you over something like that. You are the love of my life. We'll get through this. Together. I reassured her, gently rubbing her back. Really? That makes me so happy to hear. She wrapped her arms around me, and she stayed there for a long time, sobbing into my shirt. Thank you for being so accepting. I needed that, Carrie said, finally pulling away. That's what I'm here for. I'll support you no matter what. But there's something that I need to know. Anything for you. I need you to be honest with me. Is that all you're hiding? Her eyes widened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. No, this was it. There's nothing else going on. Carrie, don't lie to me. We've been married for 13 years. I know when you're not telling the truth. Fine. I've been going to a support group. You know, for alcoholics. My brows furrowed. Okay, and why did you feel the need to keep that from me? Because it's not working. This was a lot to get off my chest. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Alright, but we're going to revisit this later. She nodded before darting into our room and locking the door. I don't know what she was playing at, but I knew that my wife wasn't telling the truth. Not all of it, at least. And I was determined to find out what she was hiding. Now, I wish I would have just left her alone. Carrie didn't check herself into rehab right away. She said that she had to make some preparations before being admitted. No problem there. What was an issue was the late nights that she would spend out with people she claimed to be friends, or co-workers, or family. I knew better. Each time Carrie would tell me that she was coming home late, I'd check her location. She's not the best with technology, so I'd wager a guess that she forgot that she shared it with me, and I used that to my advantage. Whenever my wife made up an excuse not to come home, her phone said that she was always at one spot, the abandoned church on the outskirts of town, so I did what any suspicious husband would do. I tried to catch her in the act. Look, man, I don't know if this is the best idea, my coworker Jeremy said as I neared the parking lot. Oh yeah? Well, what would you do in this situation? I'd probably just, call the cops or something. Really? And tell them what? That my wife might be boinking some random dude in an empty church? They'd be more likely to write me a ticket for filing a false report. Whatever, man. I tried to warn you. Good luck. And with that, the line went dead. Thanks, I guess, I grumbled, slapping the car in park and pocketing my phone. I glanced up at the run-down building before me, steeling myself for what I was about to do. The church was even creepier in person. A fire had left it completely charred, evidenced by the imprints left around the shattered windows. Vines snaked along the exterior, lending to the place's eerie ambience. I really didn't want to have to go in there, but I knew that I didn't have any other choice. After reassuring myself in the rearview mirror for what must have been at least 10 minutes, I finally gathered the courage to go inside. I crept up to the entrance, my eyes darting frantically around the parking lot. I felt like I was doing something wrong, like one misstep would have the local police force swarming me in an instant. I quietly pushed open the front door, breathing a sigh of relief when it didn't creak. The church was dark, but I could see a faint light emitting from one of the rooms toward the back. My heart jackhammered in my chest. Was I really doing this? What if Carrie found out? It would break her. No, she wasn't being honest with me, and I had to know why. I couldn't afford to turn and run, not after making it so far. I pressed forward, following a path that had been cleared through the debris. Aside from that, the interior looked just as I imagined it had the day of the fire. Everything had been burnt to a crisp, save for a marble statue of the Virgin Mary near what used to be a stained glass window. I shuddered when I saw it. It felt as if its eyes were following me around the room, casting judgment on me. After a painstakingly long time trying to remain silent, I finally made it to the source of the light. I cautiously peeked my head around the corner to what I assumed was someone's hollowed-out office. What I saw still haunts me to this day. Carrie, along with about 4 other pale figures in hooded robes, were gathered around a man's flayed corpse. His organs had been carved out, and the group was chanting in an unintelligible language. Beneath the body lay what appeared to be a pentagram. I ducked out of view, clutching my chest and trying to stifle my breathing. This couldn't be happening. I began to question everything I knew about my wife. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I did the only logical thing I could think to do at that moment. I hightailed it out of there. I crept out of the church as quickly as I could without alerting any of those lunatics, and I raced home, going well over the speed limit. Once I arrived back at the house, I tried my best to steady myself. Hot tears stung my eyes as I pulled out my phone. I didn't want to do it, but I knew what I had to do. I steeled my resolve, and I called the police on my wife. "Hello, 911, what is your emergency?" "I think I just saw a cult ritual. There was this guy, and he was..." I nearly vomited just recanting the gruesome scene, but I managed to keep it down. "The man, he was dead. Please, you have to send someone. I was at the old church on 5th Avenue. "All right, sir. Stay calm. I'm sending a squad car. Are you in the vicinity?" "What? No, I'm safe. My eyes grew wide, and for a moment, I thought that I might pass out. Just then I received a text from Carrie. My breathing shallowed as I opened it. There was a picture, one of my car sitting in the church parking lot. It was followed by a close-up of me in the driver's seat. My heart thumped wildly in my chest as a text bubble appeared. "We need to talk. If you tell anyone about this, you'll be next." "Hello, sir? Are you still on the line?" The operator asked, pulling me out of it. "What did the man look like?" I'm not sure. I'm sorry, but I have to go." I hung up before she had a chance to protest. I didn't waste any time. I packed what I could in the few precious minutes that I had, and I left. I have a feeling that I just messed with some very powerful people. I'm going to get as far away from that town as possible, no matter the cost. I'm not sure what's next for me. All I know is that I don't want to end up like the man with his chest open for all to see, lying on the floor of an abandoned church. I work maintenance. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Usually my jobs are at office buildings, warehouses, maybe a shopping mall, but 3 months ago, I was hired for a government contract in the middle of nowhere. No address, just coordinates. When I got there, it looked like a military bunker built into the side of a mountain. The entrance was a massive steel door, unmarked except for a tiny keypad. A man in a black suit greeted me. No name, no smile, just a clipboard and a pen. "Sign here. No phones, no questions. Follow orders." I signed. The pay was insane, and I figured it was just some secret government R&D lab. How bad could it be? I regret everything. Inside, the facility was pristine and sterile, lit by an endless stretch of fluorescent lights. I was given a uniform, a small ID badge that only said Tier 1 Maintenance, and a list of protocols longer than the U.S. Constitution. Most of my tasks were mundane: replace broken air filters, tighten bolts on high-pressure pipes, sweep up debris in the lower levels. But the deeper I went, the weirder it got. Sublevels 1 through 3 were straightforward: labs, living quarters, storage. But sublevel 4, that's when the rules started showing up. The first rule I noticed was posted at the door. Do not speak to the staff on this floor unless they speak to you first. The scientists on sublevel 4 were pale, jittery, and avoided eye contact. They whispered to each other in quick, frantic bursts and moved like they were afraid of being watched. There was a room I had to clean there, room 401. The rule for that one was specific: never turn off the lights while inside. Room 401 was empty, just white walls and a metal table. Easy enough to clean, but the moment I stepped in, I felt like I was being watched. There was nothing in the room. No cameras, no vents, no windows. But the feeling was undeniable. And then the lights flickered. Just for a second, but in that split second, I swear I saw a shadow standing in the corner. When the light stabilized, it was gone. I finished my work in record time and didn't look back. By my second month, I noticed the air was heavier the deeper you went. Sublevel 6 felt like breathing underwater. The signs outside the doors were increasingly ominous. Emergency protocol alpha only. Extreme hazard class D entities. And my personal favorite? Do not enter without clearance or armed escort. One night, I was called to fix a coolant leak on sublevel 7. I didn't even know there was a sublevel 7 until that moment. My escort, a pair of armed guards with rifles I didn't recognize, didn't say a word to me as we descended in the elevator. When the doors opened, I instantly wanted to leave. The hallway was freezing and the walls were covered in frost despite the humming of industrial heaters. The lights were dimmer here, casting long, flickering shadows. We stopped at a door marked the atrium. "Stay inside the yellow lines," one of the guards said. It was the first time anyone had spoken to me that day. Inside, the room was massive, like a stadium flipped upside down. At the center was a huge glass enclosure filled with a glowing blue mist. Pipes and wires snaked around it like veins. I couldn't see what was inside the mist, but I could hear it, low, rhythmic thuds, like a heartbeat. My job was simple. Replace a cracked coolant pipe attached to the enclosure. I tried not to think about the fact that the pipe was pumping something into the glass, not out of it. While I worked, the mist began to shift. Something massive was moving inside. I saw an outline, like a figure pressed against frosted glass. At first it looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but then it moved again, and I realized it was far too tall, its limbs too long, its proportions all wrong. The guards tensed, gripping their rifles. One of them muttered, "It's awake." That's when the alarms went off. The room flooded with red light, and a deafening klaxon echoed off the walls. The mist inside the glass spun violently, and the figure slammed against the enclosure. The glass cracked, not a little, but a long, jagged fissure that stretched across its surface. "Fix the pipe now," one of the guards shouted. I froze, watching as the thing inside the mist pressed its head, or what I thought was its head, against the glass. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless surface, but I could feel it looking at me. The glass cracked again, and a low, guttural moan filled the room. It wasn't coming from the alarm or the guards. It was coming from inside my head. Words formed, not spoken, but injected directly into my mind. "Let me out. I'll make you more than human." I stumbled back, clutching my ears. The guards opened fire, their bullets tearing through the mist but doing nothing to the thing inside. The glass shattered, and the mist poured out, filling the room. The last thing I saw before blacking out was the figure stepping free of the enclosure. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, like it was trying to decide what shape to take. I woke up in the infirmary 2 days later. My contract was terminated on the spot, and I was escorted out of the facility by men in hazmat suits. They didn't answer my questions, just handed me an envelope with a check and a warning. "Speak about this, and we'll find you." That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've been having episodes. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night standing in my backyard with no memory of how I got there. Other times I'll hear whispers in the back of my mind, promising things: power, knowledge, immortality. 2 nights ago I found frost on my bedroom window. It was 80 degrees outside. Last night, I woke up to find my reflection staring at me from the mirror. Even though I wasn't moving, it smiled. I don't know what they're doing at that facility, but I know one thing. They didn't contain it. The atrium is open now, and it's looking for me. And if you hear a voice in your head that isn't yours, don't listen. It doesn't want to help you. It just wants to get out. Until a couple of days ago, I was certain cell phones saved my life. Back in the before times, I'm bringing out my old man voice here. We wrote so many things on paper. Quick notes, directions, addresses, and most of all, shopping lists. When used up, they mostly made it in the garbage bins since those were on many street corners. Even with the bins everywhere, some of these papers ended up on the ground. Sometimes they slipped out of our purses and pockets. Other times they just missed the garbage. There, these papers would lie until a good Samaritan picked them up for garbage. Or folks like my friend Jay and I picked them up. Jay and I enjoyed collecting these scraps of paper. We loved figuring out the stories about the hidden lives of the people all around us through the hints in these pieces of paper. We were fascinated to see what things people were buying. Sometimes you would find a common theme around the list. Tomatoes, bell peppers, Italian seasoning, noodles. The person is planning an Italian meal. Bread, lunch meat, cheese, juice, nuts. Someone planning their lunches. The fun ones had stars or underlined items emphasized. Sometimes that set those lists apart from all the rest. If we were really lucky, my friend and I would find a short note or letter instead of the shopping lists. Go near a school and you'd be more likely to find the special mom note. Love you, honey. Have a great day at school. Maybe it had the rare dad note. You can never go hungry at a magical beach. Not with all the sand witches around. These notes, though, could appear anywhere. It was the special notes that we found just wandering the city that had the special appeal to us. For the two of us, this became a joyful hobby. Lots of scraps of paper that we'd pick up and eventually recycle, so we were saving the planet as well. It was harmless fun. Until it wasn't. I still have the piece of paper that started everything off. Below is everything it says. 3/15/05. Groceries, sodas, waters, Powerade, pizza, pasta dinner, lasagna, party next week, chips, party next week, salsa, party next week, tomatoes, peppers, cayenne. I see you picking these up. I called my friend with the paper in my hand. Jay, just found this on the ground. That's a cool one. Yeah, cool. With just a quick phrase, we blew this off just as a list of special notes and moved on. A couple weeks later, I got a call from Jay. So maybe that wasn't just a cool note after all. Huh? That I see you picking these up note? Yeah, I don't think that was just a cool note. I found one too. Starts out with a shopping list, but then it ended with, I see you picking these up also. Jay and I got together and compared the shopping lists. The handwriting on the items was the same on each slip of paper. The handwriting at the bottom was the same on both slips of paper too, but different from the handwriting of the items. Well, technically we were invading the privacy of others, especially when those weren't shopping lists laying on the ground. We were also picking up trash in public spaces. This was the private lives folks didn't mind leaving around town, or maybe it slipped out of their pockets, but still in the public space. These messages seemed directed, like an invasion of our privacy. What do you think these mean? I shrugged. I guess we have our own special note now. Jay's voice, if my memory is correct, lifted at the end of the sentence. I guess so. Not sure I want it. Me neither. Through the next weeks, we could see the effects of the cell phone's advancement. Cheaper and cheaper phones had cameras and texting was easier, so paper was less necessary. Still, we found some slips here and there. There was nothing out of the ordinary on those slips. Not until the middle of the summer. It says, "Why are you still picking these up?" You got that one too? Yeah. Are we doing anything wrong? Wrong? What is wrong about picking up paper? We're cleaning up the sidewalk at the very least. Right. December of 2005. The loose paper is harder to find, but every slip now comes with a message from this thing that's following us. Cleaning the planet? Whatever you say. This is what you had for dinner last night. You two have predictable patterns. More details slipped into the notes. Whatever was leaving them could hear and see us. It commented on our clothing, our meals, even our sleep. The stalking became much more obvious with the last few slips that we found. Watched you snooze your alarm twice. I have a knife. Do you recognize these? And some squares of our clothing. The last slip we ever found happened when my friend and I were out together. We passed a school and a piece of paper was lying on the sidewalk. We looked at each other and debated on picking it up. On the one hand, the possibility of a guardian's note, the prize fines. On the other hand, we didn't want to know what the bottom would say. The wind picked up a little, and one of us stepped on the paper so it wouldn't blow away. I guess that means we're picking it up. The slip of paper was only a special message to us. This time, the coloring was off, a dried rust color. The message was, I'm watching you right now. We ripped up the paper and found the nearest trash can. Jay and I took any of the papers we hadn't yet recycled, and we quickly made plans to burn them all, especially those with the strange directed notes. We created a bonfire on the night of a full moon. We threw whatever spices and plants we could find into the fire between notes. Jay and I knew nothing, still don't know anything, about demonology and exorcisms. We just knew we needed a little nature and something cleansing between the notes. My friend and I hoped this would be the end of everything. 2007 brought the advent of the iPhone. With that, the slips of paper were done. I hadn't thought about these messages or the time my friend and I had this hobby for a while now, except I found a piece of paper in front of my car at a parking lot. It was flipped written side up, and all it said was, I'm still watching you. My Uncle Danny loved telling stories. Most of them were harmless. Silly things about his childhood, the kind of stuff that made you roll your eyes but secretly smile. But there was one story he only ever told once. It was different. He didn't laugh while telling it, and he didn't look at me when he finished. He told me about the donkey man. It happened when I was around 16, he started, leaning forward in his chair like he always did when he got serious. Me and my buddy Clint were driving back from a fishing trip late at night. It was one of those long, empty Texas roads where the only light comes from your high beams. We weren't even supposed to be out that late, but you know how kids are. I nodded, waiting for the punchline, but he just stared at his hands for a moment, then kept going. We saw him standing on the side of the road, just outside the reach of the headlights, a hitchhiker. He looked normal enough. Jacket, jeans, bag slung over his shoulder. Clint slowed down, and I didn't think much of it. This was the middle of nowhere. People needed rides sometimes. My uncle paused like he wasn't sure if he should keep talking. So we pull up next to him, and Clint leans over to ask where he's headed. The guy doesn't answer right away, just looks at us for a second. Then he smiles. It wasn't a nice smile, though. It was wrong, like he knew something we didn't. Clint asks again, and the guy finally climbs into the truck bed. He doesn't say a word, just sits back there with his bag. I remember looking through the rear window at him and feeling off, like we'd made a mistake. What happened next? I asked, hooked. That's when I noticed it, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. His feet? He wasn't wearing shoes. And where his feet should have been, he had hooves. Big, dark, donkey hooves. I laughed nervously. Come on, Uncle Danny. I swear, he said sharply, cutting me off. Clint saw it too. We both freaked out. Clint slammed on the gas, trying to shake him off. That's when he stood up in the bed of the truck. I swear to God I'll never forget the sound. He let out this horrible bray, half human, half donkey, and started kicking the back of the truck with those hooves. My uncle's hands shook as he mimed the motion, like he could still feel the vibrations through the steering wheel. We didn't stop driving until we got to Clint's house. When we finally got out, the truck was a mess. Dents all over the tailgate, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Clint's dad was furious, asked us what we hit. We didn't know what to say. And what happened to him, the donkey man? I asked, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. Uncle Danny shrugged. We never saw him again, but Clint's truck, those dents never came out, no matter how much they tried to fix it. I sat there, stunned. Uncle Danny didn't say another word about it. He passed away a few years ago, and sometimes I think about that story. Was he messing with me? Or was it something he carried with him all those years? Something he couldn't explain.